right, welcome to our second week of PET 673, Integrating Instructional Technology in Sport and PE. We have successfully finished our first unit, which was focusing on the ISTE and NASTE standards and reintroducing the TPACK model as what we're going to consider our framework for our class. So today we're going to spend the first, the next 60 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less, talking about what does it take to infuse technology within a system, and what are some of the factors that influence people's decision making to either adopt or reject a different idea or an innovation. So we are going to start with our lecture and our ideas today. Started. All right. Last week in review, we did reference the ISTE standards for both students and teachers. I hope that some of you took the time to go in and look at those standards. There are 6 for teachers, which have some sub-elements, and then there are specific student standards. I believe there are 5. And the more and more I interact with administrators around the United States, the more I understand that teachers are beginning to be required to evaluate if their learners are meeting the ISTE standards. And that's part of kind of the 21st century learning and also now the Common Core. We talked a bit about generational considerations for the learners that we have, our audience, these digital natives who have been involved and interacting with technology since they were tiny. Some of us in our class have self-admittedly been these digital natives where technology has been around as long as you can remember. And I read about that in some of your week 1 blogs. Finally, we talked about TPACK, and we talked about how the different knowledge constraints or the different knowledge components from what content knowledge we have as teachers, the pedagogy that we proclaim to have as educators who can design meaningful tasks for our learners, PCK that marries those ideas of what we know and how we can teach it, and then T, which is the technological knowledge, how we use devices. Do we know how to push the buttons and to make it work? And do we understand all of the features, the limitations, the strengths of the device? And then when we marry those concepts of technology knowledge with PCK, how do we as teachers think and feel about using technology in our classes to really meaningfully enhance our students' interactions with the content? How can it really help us do what we need to do within the classroom to be more efficient and to really enhance our student learning? A couple reminders before we dive into our second unit. I have received most of everyone's PE Geek selection for your technology, but please be sure to go to that URL that I sent out on eCampus that has a place for you to go and indicate which technology you are going to become an expert on, and you're going to prepare in advance of our on-campus class a short presentation of the strengths, limitations, weaknesses, specs of that technology. You are also then going to prepare a 20 to 30 minute hands-on application task where you will be the teacher, your peers will be your learners, and your real main objective is to get the technology in the hands of your students and do kind of a micro teach or a small lesson that would use that device to enhance their experience as students. So I will leave that open a few more days And when I see that everyone has picked a technology, then I will start to make that schedule for our on-campus class, what day you will be presenting to your peers. Second reminder is the blog posts. A lot of you have been posting the last few days. They were due yesterday, Monday evening, and that's just fine. I haven't gotten to all of them yet, but I will be working on that tomorrow to wrap those up and get feedback to each of you about our Reading One blog responses. All right, our second unit here, we're going to transition now into PE teachers' use of technology. And we're not going to jump right into how we as teachers use it, but we're going to kind of ease into this concept here. We're going to talk about how, what factors influence how quickly something is adopted, an innovation, a new idea is adopted within an organization or society. PE teachers have been evaluated, asked questions, studied, surveyed about how and why they use technology, and potentially why there are some barriers, what holds them or precludes them from actually jumping in and trying a new device within their classrooms. And then we'll talk finally about something called occupational socialization. That might be a new term to some of us, it might be an old term, but we will be exploring that and explore how that socialization process might help us understand why people are maybe apprehensive to try new things and integrate technology in their teaching. And we'll wrap with some our second reading and blog post and go over our second application assignment, which is called Make It an A+ unit. All right, so to start us off here, rate of adoption is this concept that is how quickly something is in fact used in kind of in a widespread across a group. And how quickly that is adopted has something to do with something called the diffusion effect, or the spread of how quickly and how far the reach of that innovation occurs. Now, there's a few features of this innovation, or this diffusion effect. One of the things is that it's really interesting how individuals can be influenced by a variety of sources as to whether they feel obligated to adopt or reject a new idea, an innovation, a new tool, something that might help them do better what they couldn't do before. And these different angles of influence come from peers, come from marketing executives, they come from professional expectations. Sometimes they are mandates and they're requirements. Other times it's optional. But there are a variety of different influencing factors that individuals negotiate before they either decide to try something or decide against moving in that direction. One example, for instance, I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to seeing how iPads could be used in PE. I didn't doubt the quality of the tool. I didn't doubt the versatility of the device. Personally, my family has one and we use it quite often for different reasons. But I really struggled with how do we invest so much money into a device or a class set of devices, or even a few within PE, when a lot of the features of the device rely on interconnectivity with Wi-Fi. And I don't know about your gymnasium, but I find a lot of the gyms that I walk into aren't wired. And I struggled with the idea of, is this reasonable? Is it a feasible, is it a good investment? And, you know, I had to debate on a variety of different levels as to whether or not I saw it as valuable. And the more people I talked to, And, the more people I talked to, the more schools that I went into, I started to see that there was an increasing number of schools that were wired in the gymnasium. I also started to recognize that not all of the features of the iPad needed to be connected to Wi-Fi in order to work. Some of them do, and updates and so on, but my idea of, oh no, we can't use iPads in PE, really was influenced over a long period of time, and by being intentional in looking for ways that could inform my decision making. Another feature of this diffusion effect is this concept of peer networks or social systems. And there's this research out there that indicates that if there's only 20 to 30% within a system or a network that has adopted this idea or this innovation, then really it's kind of considered this low adoption, almost like it doesn't even exist. But if more than 30% of the people within that community or that network use or advocate or support the idea, this innovation, this tool, there's all of a sudden this kind of buzz, this not only increased awareness, but people start to link in and connect to, oh, I might be able to use this. So consider, for instance, if you're a faculty, a PE faculty within your county of 10, and if you see the value of iPads in PE lessons, you and one other colleague are excited, you are doing your best, you are trying to communicate, you're doing sessions, you are maybe raising funds to get more iPads in your program. The two of you are doing a fantastic job and may, in fact, be doing such a good job that your students are seeing the value of it, your parents are seeing the value of it, but you're not seeing your peers, beyond that single colleague, you're not seeing your peers kind of buy into this idea. Now, if you can get one more colleague to buy in, or even two more, now you have 30 to 40% of your professional community within your district who are kind of working on understanding how to use these iPads. Research says that if you can break that 30% threshold, then you may very well have a higher chance of getting the rest of your colleagues in your district to buy in. So what that can tell you is that it's almost just, it's a small start. If you can kind of think about then that idea of starting, developing it small, and then slowly expanding your idea beyond, that's when ideas diffuse across different networks or communities. The third concept within this idea of diffusion effect, or how quickly something is adopted, has to do with the interconnectivity of your community. So if that group of 10 faculty members, that group of 10 PE teachers within your district, if prior to the implementation of iPads, your group talked a lot, met on a regular basis for professional development or socially, there is a higher chance that that use of that tool will spread faster than if the interconnection or the interrelationship between your colleagues was less valued or less developed before. So when we consider kind of the idea of families, when you have families, but extended families starting to use iPads or starting to use social media or starting to use smartphones, I know that my parents in the Midwest and my in-laws who are in the Midwest, we couldn't communicate for quite some time via video chat easily until we convinced them to purchase a device, a mobile device, where we could use FaceTime or Skype or Google Hangout. so that the communication between their granddaughter and them could be an easy one. We had communicated before, but the fact that there was some of that strong interpersonal network or relationship built to kind of convey that trust. This is a good thing. This is a device that will help us do something better that we couldn't do before. Now, this concept of diffusion, right? There have been different innovations or inventions for the last, 200 years from a technology standpoint. If we look back to the late 1800s, electricity was developed, then the telephone just 3 years later. Radio, television, the PC, mobile phone, and the web. Those are just several different inventions or innovations. In the far right column, you'll see the number of years that it took for that invention to be used on a massive scale, to be diffused across society and social networks. Electricity took 46 years to be used across large spans of individuals. Now, if you think about electricity and telephone and radio and television, some of those early inventions, you might guess some of the factors that influenced that would be the infrastructure, right? Putting up telephone, electric poles across the United States in and of itself took time. And that, of course, contributed to the volume or the number of years that it took to have people adopt these concepts. But as you can see, as we get closer and closer to year 2000 or late 1990s, it's not taking people nearly as long to adopt or decide that that innovation or that invention could help them in some ways. Now, there are people who are researching this idea of how long does it take people to gravitate or be convinced of the value of an innovation, and how many different types of considerations need to be examined when we think about, will I use technology, or will my entire PE program use technology? Now, Everett Rogers published some research a while ago, 1983, and looked at this concept of diffusion and how quickly things are adopted. And one small piece are these 5 factors. The relative advantage. Is it newer and is it better? Is it compatible? Does it align with something that I believe in, my values? Maybe my curriculum, maybe my instructional strategies. How complex is this new innovation, right? Do people talk about it as being really hard to use? And if it's hard to use, then folks probably aren't going to adopt it as quickly. What about, does it work? Can I believe that it's been effective, that it's been trial tested and that it works? Am I going to buy a generation 1, or am I going to buy a generation 6 because I know that after several generations it's been refined? And finally, do people see that it's actually being used and it works by others? Is it observable? And these 5 attributes of innovation, it's pretty amazing. Even if you sit down and think about some of the technologies that you use on a daily basis for personal use, why do you use those? Is it because it aligns with all 5 of these? Maybe 4, maybe 3. It's pretty amazing to think about how this relates to TPACK. And we had a lot of your classmates post in your blog that somewhat overwhelming, this idea of using technology in PE. and that while I might be comfortable using the devices on my own, I'm not sure that it gives me a relative advantage in my classroom. I like to use it personally, but some of you described some hesitancy about I'm not sure if I can really get my head wrapped around how it can help me do something better in my class. Some others, rightfully so, expressed some concern about its potential alignment with your curriculum or the way that you teach. One example, not from this cohort, but from several semesters ago, I was working with some students in the undergraduate program, and we challenged our undergraduate students to use a technology within a unit of instruction during student teaching. And at that particular time, we were assigning students technology because of some certain resource issues, and we didn't have enough of the most popular devices to go around, so we had to do an assignment. And the students, after their projects, expressed some challenges. They said, while I liked using the video cameras in my unit, I thought it would have been so much better to use the fitness watches because my unit had a stronger fitness focus, and if I would have been able to choose what technology I used, it would have made sense for them to use a technology that would either track or monitor or allow students to measure their fitness levels or their activity levels, rather than using this video technology, which turned out to be a nice project as well. But they found some challenges with the compatibility, its alignment, per se. Some of you described some complexities. Unfortunately, there was a few of us who said, every time I use it, there's something that goes wrong. So there's this perception of technology fails, or there's challenges that you have yet to overcome. So there's, out of these attributes, when we think about how quickly something might be adopted, these 5 areas are things that are kind of known to be major influencers. Now this next slide is going to be a little bit busy, but give me a second to explain it, because Rogers considered these 5 attributes to be just a portion of what influences how quickly something gets diffused. Now, there are 5 Roman numerals down this chart, and if you can see it, you might have to zoom in or squint a little bit. I'm sorry for the quality. But on the left-hand column is variables determining how quickly something is adopted, this idea, this innovation, this tool. In Roman numeral 1 are those attributes of an innovation that we just talked about. Now, Everett Rogers and some scholars since have said between 50 and 87% of the variability of how quickly something gets adopted has to do with those attributes. Okay. 50 to 90% has to do with how people perceive the individual technology or innovation, what features, how they perceive that. Now, Roman numeral 2 is this concept of the type of innovation decision. There are 3 options under there. It says optional, collective, and authority. Now, if decisions relate, if a person's decision to adopt or not adopt the technology is optional, it's thought that technology will happen more often or more rapidly. Okay. If it's optional for me to buy a smartphone, the idea is that, well, I'll decide, I will weigh the pros and cons based on the attributes above, and if I want to adopt it, I'll adopt it. If I have the means to adopt it, I'll adopt it. The concept of the collective decision is that the more people who are involved in the decision-making process, okay, the slower that slows the adoption rate. So if there are more people who are saying, well, I think we should, or maybe we shouldn't, and there's a small committee or a large committee trying to determine, then it takes a bit longer, because different people have different perceptions of the attributes. Different people have different experiences. And the third is authority. So if there is an authoritative decision-making group where there's only a few people involved in making that decision, that is probably, as the research says, the fastest. Okay, so here's an example. Two examples that were authority. Seatbelt use. When it was finally decided that seatbelt wear and seatbelt use was going to become law, people didn't have an option, and there wasn't a collective decision. It was a public referendum that seatbelt use was going to be promoted, marketed, and then reinforced, typically by reprimand or ticketing if that behavior was not adopted. Another example of authoritative decisions would be when fluoride went into municipal water supplies. That was made by either a major or a city manager, and different communities then had to follow along with that particular innovation because of one person or a few people's decision-making skills related to that innovation. Now, you very well may be able to think back as your either role as an educator. Have there been optional, collective, or authoritative decisions made within your school where you have had the choice, or you've been forced to? Or have there been some times where committees get together, and how long does it take for that decision to be made? The communications channel, which is number 3. Here, there's what types of communication channels, mass media or interpersonal, are used to promote that particular innovation. Is it something that happens and people start to become more aware of it because it's a mass media? Or is it something that it's kind of just a word of mouth? That also influences how quickly something can be adopted. The nature of the social system is number 4. Carr and Rogers talk about that being in the concepts of how connected is that communication structure. Will something be adopted within a group of professionals, in a hospital or a faculty, a group of teachers, faster than across the United States as consumers as a whole? If we think about different social systems, we can observe different things about that innovation when our social networks are smaller, when there is greater volume of interpersonal relationships of people who might in fact be using that innovation, and we can see and we hear about the success or failures of that particular device. The 5th item on there, folks, is the extent of change agents' promotional efforts. Now, this relates to somebody taking the idea and really spreading the word, demonstrating, showcasing, and promoting the positive elements, positive attributes of that innovation. The extent of the change agent's promotional efforts, the researchers indicate that has, of the other 4, that has the greatest bang for the buck when it comes to helping make change above and beyond individuals' perceived attributes of that innovation. So the concept here is there are lots of things in our own professional decision making. We very well may be negotiating these different variables, both from the attributes of the different technologies, but then also, is Jones going to make me, type of innovation decision, is she going to make me use technology in my teaching? And if she's going to make me, then I suppose I'll comply. To what extent will I comply? Has a lot to do with how much you value and how much you perceive how much value you perceive to be within that technology. Moving along. Now we have, there's something called adopter categories and characteristics. And this I want to challenge you to think a little bit about yourself and other people that you know within your professional network. There are 5 different categories of adopters, technology or innovation adopters. There is 2.5% who are innovators. The next biggest group are early adopters. Then early majority and late majority fall within that 68% of our bell curve. And then we have a group called laggards, which doesn't seem like a very nice way to refer to people, but laggards are folks that are on the opposite spectrum of innovators. So you might be able to guess what those folks do, look like, and so on. So let's take a little bit closer look here. So innovators, these are folks who, when it comes to technology, take a lot of risk. They want to see what's new. They're probably the ones that are always on different websites looking for what's the newest and the greatest. Characteristics of these folks: they have the financial security to make kind of decisions about purchasing that maybe some of the rest of us in the world don't have the luxury of being so open with our spending. They're okay with uncertainty and risk, so if something doesn't work, if their financial investment in that technology or that idea falls through, they're fine with it. They're happy to continue on with making the next, taking the next risk and buying the next new and greatest thing, even if it didn't work. Now these innovators, while they sound fun and adventurous, and I'm sure they're wonderful people to spend time with, the level of risk is, to me, a little bit unsettling. But it's a really good thing that we have these people, because their role is this concept of being the gatekeeper in society. If we didn't have people who were willing to flirt with danger and try something that might fail, the concept of having new ideas stem from failure or success would be stagnant. I'm not suggesting you need to fall within any of these categories, nor do I expect that we'll fall within, I don't expect that many of us will fall within this concept of innovator, but if we think about this example, there's a lot of text on here. These are 2 different quotes from PC Mag, which is a review for different technologies. And the first one was a post from 2010 about 3D television sets, and I'll just read it real quick. The quote read, "Even so, buying a 3D HD TV setup today is an expensive and potentially risky proposition. The 3D home entertainment market is sure to change as additional standards shake out and preferred 3D technologies rise to dominate the market. If you're a sports fan or even an avid gamer, however, 3D is worth exploring. Just be ready to pay for it." Now, last year, I know that this was posted in 2010, but in 2010, the price for 3D TVs was $3,000 to $12,000. In 2013, the price has shifted to be somewhere between $700 and $9,000. Okay, you can go big dollar if you want. But PC Mag's reviewers in 2013 about 3D TV said, for all the hype that they've created, for all the hype they've received in the past few years, 3D HD TVs haven't exactly been flying off the shelves. In fact, HD TV manufacturers are moving away from promoting 3D as the next big thing for displays. These days, high-end HD TV usually includes 3D. So this idea that innovators in 2010, 11, 12 bought 3D TVs. Maybe it was a status thing, maybe it was something relative to, I don't know what, but they were not afraid to adopt and innovate early. If you were one who waited a little bit longer and fell within the next category of somebody who adopted early, but just not as early as innovators, you may very well have benefited from lessons learned and the price is lower. So if from $7 to $100 to $9,000 is a big change from $3,000 to $12,000, and now the technology is becoming so refined that what you're paying for already has 3D in it if you are looking for it. Now there is this next group called early adopters. And early adopters are folks that are commoners. You know, they're not the super wealthy, they don't have a lot of discretionary income per se, but they are people who have opinions that are valued, and they might be perceived as people who like role models, who make good investment decisions. These folks probably are the ones who people look to decide the trialability and the observability of the technology. This is still a small population. It's only less than 14% of our society, but their role is to help decrease the uncertainty of an idea, or if in fact they're not sure, if in fact people still aren't sure about it, this group helps us to move that forward. Now, if you look at it, if you remember from our earlier graph, 20 to 30%. Remember, if we want to meet that, we want to make that 30% threshold. So ideas aren't going to break. It's not going to be a big thing unless 30% of the population are using it. Right now, innovators and early adopters only sum up to about 17%. So you consider this still isn't very big. I don't know about you, but I can remember some hearing about or seeing some technologies that have come and gone and just never caught any traction. That doesn't mean that people didn't buy them. That doesn't mean that they didn't work entirely. But probably these innovators and our early adopters were the ones that tried it. They were the ones that helped refine it. And if it then did take off in some ways, it's because of the work or the investment of time and energy that those folks in the 17% of our society did. Now, Bonnie Mostyn, I'm not sure if this is a name that is familiar to some of you. Bonnie Mostyn is a self-proclaimed PE tech guru. The thing that I like about Bonnie is that she does, I would put her in the early adopter category because she does a lot of research and trial of different technologies. And then she posts on her website this, the pros, the cons, the limitations, some ideas. And before technology in PE really caught a lot of traction, Bonnie was one of the first names out there where she was the go-to early adopter who helped make those judicious decisions about whether something was worth it or not. So within our field, I think Dr. Mostyn for sure was one of those early adopters to pave the way for some of the rest of us that have since come and have benefited from her skepticism and the knowledge and files that she has gone through. Now we have our early majority, okay, and so now we're getting into our dominant. Now we've got 34%. We've met that threshold. We're over 34% of people who quite possibly may be adopting something. These folks fall into the category of early majority. Okay, these people are deliberate thinkers. They're ones that talk to people about things that are working and things that aren't. They might be a little bit stingy about what investments they make, but if they do make a decision, it's because it is a quality investment that they are sure of. And this concept of deliberate, they follow these early adopters and these innovators in such a way that is a wise investment decision. But they're not necessarily interested or willing to be the ones out there with their neck on the line, with their dollars down, without knowing that it's going to work. Okay? So by this time, this early majority, if we look back at our attributes of the innovation, by this time, it's already been marketed or communicated that there's an advantage to the device, that there is some simplicity in use, not very complex, that it aligns with something, right? It might align with their value, it might align with their workflow, it might align with their curricular model or their instructional attempts, and it's been trialed and there's some observed success. So by this time, these early majority folks, which self-admittedly, this is the group that takes an innovation and kind of lets it diffuse even further when this group gets a hold of something. There are two more categories. There's the late majority and there is the laggards. Now in this case, you'll see that there's not a role listed on the bottom. In this case, we've gone over the hump of our bell curve, and in this case, these are typically followers. They might adopt and they might adapt, but in this case, it's because of necessity or pressure. They might only do it because others have, and in essence, they're still probably kind of somewhat skeptical. An example of this from the economic necessity. It must have been last spring. I went into the Verizon store in town, and with one of my older colleagues, and we were looking for just a basic cell phone for them, and it was very, very challenging to find a cell phone that did not have a data plan and that just had the basic flip phone call functions. Out of necessity, unless this person wanted to do like a pay by minute option, there were no choices at this particular store for this person. So out of necessity, there was a decision to be made. Do they transition to having a data plan and having a smartphone or not? Response to social pressure. Did I pressure this person? I hope not. But it wasn't. It was in that interchange, in that interaction, that talk about, well, do you want this or do you want that? Hey, I find it helpful to have this feature or that feature. There was some cautious skepticism. In the end, they decided to go with a smartphone for a variety of different reasons, and they're happy now. But in regards to the timeline of how this particular individual fell within the late majority category, it was well beyond the time in which the innovators, the early adopters, and even the early majority folks had decided to approach it. Our final group is the laggards. These folks are the ones who um, are sometimes, it says, lapped with new innovations at the point of an adoption. Um, that could very well be my same example here with there's generation 4, 5, 6 of different smartphones, and the concept of being lapped is how you even catch up in some regards to all of the different features and options and devices when you have not taken any steps forward. Some of our grandparents might fit into that category. Very few young people, college students that I know here at WVU, have landlines in their apartments, and typically are ones who have mobile devices. But if I go back home, if I go back to rural Midwest Iowa, there are some elderly folks and other folks who are more traditional, who only communicate on landlines and do not own cell phones, and are suspicious for whatever reason that the cell phone industry is what it is. In any event, there are folks that don't want to move forward, and I've worked with, and I know that some of you have, worked with people within professional organizations who the old way is the best way. And the point of reference for what is the best way to do it is something that's already been done. So in this case, this last group of 16% of folks may actually never allude to or elect to adopt the technology. One story here about another laggard that I remember. When the internet was just becoming used, and the benefits of the internet was something that was starting to ramp up, I remember individuals saying, I'm never going to use the internet because I don't want to sit and wait for it to load. This was an individual who enjoyed being active, enjoyed being outside, and at that time, the innovation, the dial-up internet, was not fast enough to convince this individual that it was new, better, or aligned with the values that he held. So in that case, he didn't see the benefits. And while I don't know if that individual has yet adopted the idea of the World Wide Web and the benefits in which might become through there, I remember very clearly that he wasn't interested, that it was going to be something of the past. So wherever you fall within this bell curve of adopters, recognize that people around you might be in a different stage. And considering that, we have to communicate differently, and we have to communicate in such a way that would either help people see the value or learn from people to help us see the value of different tools. Not every innovation, not every technology fits, and as we'll talk about here in just a moment, I don't suggest that each of us adopt all of the technologies at once. So let's take a quick look here at how PE teachers use technology and what have been some of the recorded barriers to actually adopting. We read last week in Moving Beyond the Stopwatch and Whistle that there may be, in fact, some issues or concerns about teacher preparation, that technology use in teacher preparation may have has been a little bit stagnant in the way that we think about preparing young teachers and beginning teachers to use technology, and what can we do to move beyond that. There was a study done in 2008 and a couple other studies in the early 2000s that supported the idea that there were 7 primary factors that influence PE teachers' use. Availability, time, budget, skills, knowing how to use the technology, teaching experience or number of years of teaching. There was actually a factor that it was gender. Females tended at that point to be more proactive with using technology in their PE lessons. And then, of course, one's attitudes toward technology influenced whether or not people would adopt. Now, within our class, we kind of, it's not quite a bell curve, and it's not needed to be. This is not our type of adopter. So the left is not our is not our innovator, and the right is not our laggard. But here we have from your blog post, there was an ask for you to self-reflect on the stage of adoption of technology use in your current PE setting or in your professional situation. And we do have kind of a bit of a curve here that slants more towards the stage 4, 5, and 6. But we do have some individuals who self-reportedly were a little bit on the left hand of that spectrum, where 7, 8 of us said, well, I'm aware that there's technology, I'm learning how to use the process, I understand that there are technologies available, but maybe not using it in my classes yet, for a variety of reasons, many of which were explained and explored a little bit more detail. And then there were others of us in our class who self-reported high levels of familiarity, being able to adapt that technology into different settings, or even being creative and seeing different ways that we can be creative to expand that technology use beyond a single situation. From your blog posts, a few of the explanations you can kind of read there. Not having resources within my setting was probably, if I interpreted properly, one of the primary factors of why somebody might have been at a stage awareness or stage 1. I know they're there, but I don't have any resources, and therefore, I'm not sure how I could actually use it in PE. Stage 2, one of you reported, every time I've tried to use it, I've had problems. So I might be learning, but at the same point, I'm somewhat hesitant, and that's fine. I appreciate that honesty and that robust description of where we are, because everyone is somewhere. And this class is not just for those people who are super comfortable. I hope that this class can be seen as something where you can start where you are and maybe progress slightly at the end. There were several of us who were at our stage 3 who said, I can see how it could help, and I might actually use it as part of my own personal self, or for my own personal enjoyment or entertainment, but I'm not sure how to make it happen. There was one example, which was really cool, about how there might be an specific app that I think I've seen, and I think it could help me solve a particular problem that I'm having with my students who are running the mile, and I'm not sure if I trust their mile split times that they're giving me. So I think I could use that app, but I'm not sure how to do it. So that I'm understanding, but I'm not sure how to make it come to life. Stage 4, here's where we saw several of us self-reporting, I'm a digital native. Technology has been a part of my life as long as I can remember, and because of that, I'm comfortable. I'm familiar with everything. Stage 5, I'm good at it, but I'm not a master. I can use it, and I'm slowly integrating it into my PE classroom, but not at a high rate right now. And we had a few people who self-reported, I'm seen as a tech leader in my program, in my department. I love to try new things to see if they work. And the way that we are, folks, I love this distribution. I love to see the different places that we are, and from your experiences, I hope that we can, although this next couple weeks is kind of distant, when we get on campus, this interesting dynamic of those that are more comfortable and leaders within their programs, and the rest of us who might not be quite there yet. I hope that we can share ideas along the way and help us to kind of explore this concept of technology use. We've talked a lot about barriers, I guess, and one of the things that, one of the ways we've talked about or has been written about barriers is in this two-part graphic here. So barriers have been described as either being first-order barriers, if you look on the right side, okay? Or I should say top, excuse me. The first-order barriers are things that are external. Access to technology, training to be able to use it, support if something breaks down, and in that case, we have, Ertmer talks about this concept that first-order barriers are easy fixes. Now, it doesn't mean it'll fix tomorrow. It doesn't mean that it's a fast fix, but they're easy fixes because it's resources. Second-order barriers, which are more internal, like attitudes towards technology. What poor attitude? I don't think it could work. I've tried and I've failed. Skill or competence in regards to I'm not interested or willing to learn, or pedagogical beliefs like technology doesn't have a place in PE, or technology will only increase the time my students are standing around, and besides that there's no other benefits. Second order barriers tend to be harder to change, harder to adjust, and in some cases you might see in yourself or in your colleagues or in those around you a little bit of both, right? So if you're not in the stage 5 or 6, you might relate to some first and some second order barriers. And what tends to be the most reported barriers that are first order, okay, budget, that's typically our greatest challenge, class size, lack of training, administrative support, the internet broke, or support from my colleagues. In a study that is part of your reading this week by Anne Gabone and her faculty advisors up at New York State, she reported that from these secondary PE teachers in the state of New York, these were the top barriers to reasons why they did not use technology in their classes. Which, if I go back real quick, all of them were first order barriers. Very few were second order or internal issues. Most all in the highest or the largest barriers were external. So I want you to think about, well, what does that mean to you, right? Not to say that first order barriers are easy to solve or are going to be solved tomorrow. But when we think about kind of lobbying for things that you want or need, who do you need to get on your side? Who do you need to be advocating for or with or to? Who do you need to be showing, or maybe it's after our class, maybe it's after our summer together, and you gravitate towards a particular technology and see the value and are beginning to be comfortable. And at the end of our class, you'll have a plan that you'll have designed and gotten feedback on about how you're going to try to use that technology within your lessons, within a unit of instruction in your school. And how are you going to convince your administrator that you need a small budget to make this happen? And you need some support from them to make sure that you have the resources that you need, and that your colleagues aren't going to be roadblocks to you. What do we need to do? And it starts with you knowing proper training, you knowing what uh, the tools, what the tools are that you need. How do I push those buttons? How do I make sure that I know the ins and outs of that device? You're going to be a PE geek for one device, and you're going to come to campus being the primary expert. There are some of those tools on that list that I know how to use and I like to use regularly, but there are some that I'm not as familiar with and I haven't seen effectively used within settings. And so you're going to come having had explored that and be able to teach other people how to use it, provide a demonstration of how it could align with their instructional goals. And not only are you going to teach others, you are going to benefit as well. Okay, so you are going to benefit by having your 21 other colleagues who are showing up on campus in July to train you and teach you how to use a new tool, a new device that you may have never seen or heard about before, and see about how it could align with an instructional goal. Now, taking that, I don't expect that we're going to walk away from here with you prepared to buy and implement 17 different technologies into your fall curriculum. Rather, you might pick one or maybe two. And then you're going to need to plan. How will that unit plan look? How are those individual lesson plans? How might you have students using the technology? So how might you have to manage that technology as within your class? What do you want to do to collect information to evaluate whether that your project was useful, whether it was valuable to have the technology in your class or not? And then having your leaders and having your administrators support what you do sometimes comes from this concept of advocating. Yeah, you're going to communicate with them in advance what you're going to do, and you might need to solicit some funds or procure some technology or equipment. We'll talk about that later. But after you finish, or even during the process of implementing your project, how are you going to communicate that back to your admin? And what pictures are you going to share? What stories are you going to share? Are you going to communicate it to your parents, community members, via a website or a blog or a newsletter? And to integrate technology effectively, these 4 things really need to be in place. And some of it parallels with our class. And I do hope that you'll find support in making this happen, at least as a trial, at least experimenting with it at least once. Now, all these barriers, this is our third and final section. All of these barriers to technology use in PE might be able to link back to occupational socialization. And as we think about occupational socialization, there are 3 phases. The first phase is pre-training. For those of us who are PE teachers, who've gone through a formal teacher education program, this is the point prior to us entering our formal programming. This is the time during kindergarten through 12th grade, and maybe freshman and sophomore year in college, where we learned about what it meant to be a PE teacher by observing people around us, observing our PE teachers and coaches. During pre-training, we talked about this concept of apprenticeship of observation. Apprentice is somebody who learns by watching. Back in the day, even now in certain trades, you have to apprentice. You watch. You spend hours watching, observing how the trade is done. And only until like the very end of your apprenticeship do you get to actually try. During your kindergarten through 12th grade years, you spent hours and hours and hours apprenticing with your PE teachers and coaches. You observed what it took, what they did to teach PE. For some of us, our apprenticeship of observation we apprenticed and we observed really excellent teachers. Others of us apprenticed and observed poor or maybe marginal teachers. And as a result of that apprenticeship, we walked out of our pre-training phase with a warrant, a subjective warrant is what it's called. They talk about the warrant as being something like, this is how I see PE teachers. Right? And my subjective means it's based on my anecdotal observations or lived experience. And my warrant is a belief. So it's a belief about something. In this case, I had a warrant, a subjective warrant about PE, that PE teachers tried new things. I went through a PE program as a K-12er that I wouldn't say was overly innovative. We weren't doing, we weren't integrating a bunch of technology, and we weren't necessarily, getting national recognition. But I remember the units of instruction that I had, like cross-country skiing and archery and kayaking in the community pool and field hockey and rappelling from our school with National Guard and camping. And some of those kind of non-traditional sports made an impression on me as an individual, as a professional, and it launched me into the belief and value that I want to be a PE teacher. I want to go through a formal teacher education process. And that warrant was mine. Some people's warrant can be different in what I observed, or what was observed was coaches or teachers, PE teachers that sat on the sidelines, that didn't plan for lessons, they planned for practices. Maybe they didn't do a lot of teaching during class. And so if an individual comes out of their pre-training phase with a warrant of, I just have to be a supervisor in PE, then the chances are that individual, if they elect to progress into going into formal teacher education training, go in with a belief and a value that PE teachers don't have to work very hard. Because what they observed and what they saw were teachers who didn't do much. Now there's a second phase of this occupational socialization, which is pre-service. This is the phase where students enter a formal teacher education program. So many of you have indicated that you did your formal training 3 to 4 years and you got certification to be a health and or PE teacher or otherwise. You probably went through courses like methods courses and assessment courses, and you may have gone through courses that tried to teach you about how to teach and what to teach within physical education. And depending on your warrant, depending on what you saw in pre-training, some of that either aligned or went against how you thought teaching was going to be. A lot of the times during our program here, sometimes I ask the students during their student teaching, was this what you'd expected it to be? And some of them say yeah, and others say no. They say, quite frankly and honestly, and I value their candidness, they say, I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I didn't know teachers had to plan this much. I didn't know that there were these expectations that were standards. And CSOs. I didn't realize that. But it's during this pre-service phase that the idea is that you learn how to teach. One of the things that the research says is that even having gone through a pre-service phase, at times the warrant and the apprenticeship of observation can stay so strong that maybe not much change will occur, even with a formal teacher education program. The third phase is induction, and it's during this phase where there's transition from teacher prep to continuing professional development. So I'm no longer an undergraduate student. I have my certification in health and PE, and I'm going to take a position, high-paying position, I'm sure, and I'm going to start implementing that of which I learned during pre-service, during my formal education program. There's some transitional things that happen. There's a variety of things called marginalization, reality shock, isolation, workload conflict, deprofessionalism, or washout. These factors that folks you may have experienced. When you got your first job, maybe you didn't realize how much time, how, from a reality shock perspective, how those kids came in, came out, came in, came out, and you had 15 minutes for lunch, and you had to set up your class space as one class was leaving and the next class was coming because the teacher was ready to drop off. Or maybe you were shocked to find your gymnasium totally filled with folding chairs in the morning when you had a big team sport competition day planned, and no, the gym needs to be used for an assembly today. Those types of transitional issues you're not necessarily prepared for. You're kind of protected from during your pre-service experience and during your pre-training, during your K-12. You just went with the flow anyways. You didn't have to deal with it. You were a student and you had to miss PE that day. It stunk, but so be it, right? You didn't have to be the one. You weren't the teacher having to adjust your schedule and so forth. There are different things like feeling isolated from professional peers. Quite possibly you're the only PE health teacher in your building. And even though you interact with children or adolescents hour after hour after hour, people have reported feeling isolated, professionally isolated from other health or PE teachers because they don't see or feel connected with classroom teachers or others within their building. And therefore, there can sometimes be this sense of, I'm alone in this. And so during induction, there's this process of trying to work through these transitional issues. And if you can overcome those transitional issues, quite possibly you're going to be able to implement some of which you learned during pre-service teaching. And you may very well implement some of the things that, what happens most often is that rather than implementing what you learned in your teacher education program, a lot of the times beginning teachers revert back to what they saw during pre-training. So even though they went through 5 semesters or 4 semesters or 8 semesters of formal teacher education, what is most prominent in their thinking is their 12 years of training as a student. Is, I saw my teacher do this. I experienced my PE teachers doing this. So there's this battle, in a sense, of once you get out and into your position, do you revert back to your pre-training, or do you rely heavily on your what you learned during pre-service and continue to build that knowledge base forward rather than relying on what you experienced as a youngster? So this concept that it's cyclical is interesting, because as you are a teacher in stage 3, you are then influencing those children who are in your classes right now, and they are apprenticing and building a warrant about what PE teaching is and what PE teachers do today. And some of those children, some of those students, some of those athletes, some of those adolescents, some of those graduating seniors may very well take the same track that you did and enroll in a teacher education program for health and PE and start their pre-service and then get a job and maybe replicate what it is you're doing. So we have this cycle, right? This cycle of occupational socialization going on. Now think back for 1 second, okay? So track with me here. This is my last point. If you today sit down and think about, not only am I impacting the lives of children because I'm caring and considerate and I value their health and their well-being, okay? and that is very honorable. Think about the types of teaching behaviors that you're modeling to the students. Whether they know it or not, do you have lesson plans available for your reference when you're teaching? Does your do your classes happen in a consistent routine? Meaning, do they know what to expect when they come in, what to expect when it's skill practice, what to expect when it's competition, what to expect when to leave? Do they know that there are assessments and evaluations of what they're learning? Or do we evaluate them on if they're wearing their tennis shoes and if they've shown up with a good attitude? Depending on what you do today is influencing this next generation of teachers, and how young people who will grow to be administrators and will grow to be physicians, how they perceive our field. My ask to you as it relates to our class is, are you willing to integrate some innovation, integrate some technology, integrate something that would spark their attention and quite possibly change the way that they experience you as a teacher? If you already use a lot of different technologies, that might become a norm for them. They understand that technology is inherent in what you do as a teacher, and it's valued and it's necessary. And if they decide to pursue a degree or a field of physical education, that might influence how they learn and then how they teach in the future. This cycle is going to be a little bit explored, I believe, in one of your readings this week. So our take-home messages that I hope that we can have from our session today is that there is some patterns in which innovations or ideas and technology diffuse across a system. And whether that's society, whether that's your professional network, whether that's your school district, or you, new ideas spread. And if we understand what causes that, we can be more deliberate in making decisions about why we may or why we may not elect to do something. First and second order barriers don't have to be roadblocks that prohibit progress. They are real. They are legitimate. They cause us to struggle and stumble. I challenge us to be open about those barriers. Several of you have in your blogs. You have described issues or challenges with colleagues or personal attitudes towards technology and its potential place within PE. Thank you. I just challenge us to not let that be the place where we stop. And then finally, I challenge you to think about how today's PE teachers, how you are shaping tomorrow's perception of PE and health educators, and what tools you choose to decide to use, and what tools and what teaching behaviors you decide to make evident and prominent in what you do. I assess, I use technology, I have a curriculum, I use different teaching models and teaching strategies. I reflect on my teaching. I value students. I want them to be healthy and active individuals who can participate in physical activity and sport and enjoy it for a variety of reasons. I'm probably preaching to the choir. So our take-home, or our tasks to end on here as we wrap. We have some readings, master students. There are 3 readings posted on Blackboard. Let me see if I can refresh my Blackboard here real quick. I had several of you indicate that we had problems getting to our readings, so let me show you how to do that real quick. Remember to post your reading responses to your blog, and I'll show you how to make something an A+ unit. So let me pull up my Blackboard here real quick. Okay. So this might be small for some of you. I do apologize. For your readings, remember we're going into our course content. This particular week, remember it's week 2, unit 2. And if I scroll down slightly, your folder here has a listing. Master students, here are your 3 readings. PhD students or doctoral students, you'll read those 3 plus these 2. And all of these readings, my friends, can be found in this folder. So you can go right in here, make sure that you don't have to read all of them. You read the ones that are assigned for you. And then you'll respond to your blog, which you can access by going here. And there are 3 questions here. So make sure you read through those questions. For those of you who have gotten feedback on your blog from week 1, probably the area where if you've lost any points, it's on a 5-point scale. It's 5, 4, or 3. If you've lost points, it's likely because the depth of your response or the linking back to the reading. So to provide enough detail for me to know that you have, in fact, read the reading and you're thinking about what this means for you as a professional. Our last thing that I want to end on today, there is a class assignment. We have a new assignment. It's called Make It an A+ Unit. Our Make It an A+ Unit, excuse me. That was just a sample. You can download the Word document here to get some details. And as you can see, make this bigger for us. You can download this on your own. So I'll just do this for a moment. So the rationale is this. We all have a favorite unit. Sometimes it's the unit we're most comfortable with teaching because it's highest in our skill. Other times it's something that the students love the most because the way you've structured it, built it, or designed it. Okay, so as teachers gain experience and learn through trial and error, many of us evolve our teaching and become more effective, and we work to make sure our units are more meaningful for our learners. But I would posit that this doesn't happen naturally. Intentionality is needed to transform a good unit to a great unit. Great units are not only well thought through task progressions, but also include resources that you and your students can use to enhance learning and supplement your instruction. Some examples might be student worksheets, instructional aids or videos, checking for understanding tasks, formative or summative assessments, student projects. So your task is to use available tools like Google Docs, YouTube, SlideShare, Prezi, okay, to take one of your A units to an A+ unit. Okay, so your challenge is to select your favorite unit. If you don't have access to a written unit plan, then I will post one on our course web on eCampus, and you can use to enhance that. You can use your discretion to add as many ancillary materials, that means supplemental items, okay? Things that would supplement or enhance your unit. Okay? You can do as many, but there are 4 that are required. You need to create a unit block plan. So what will happen on each day, what's the topic and progression. 2 visual or instructional aids. That could possibly be something like worksheets or things that you're going to post on the walls to help them go through a station. That could be a video that you create or find that will help them create or launch them into a project that they have to do. Might be a web quest or an assignment that they have. And then the final is some sort of a formative or summative assessment. That could be a test, that could be a worksheet, that could be a skills combine that you're going to have them do. But you'll create these 4 supplemental items or these ancillary items and prepare them and then attach them to your assignment on eCampus. To be able to submit those on eCampus, I'm going to show you here real quickly how to do that. And once you get those submitted, when we come on campus, Each person is going to then go through and showcase what your A+ unit is to your peers. So we'll be able to see and experience several A+ units that have been created by our colleagues. All right, so I submitted a sample here just because I wanted to experiment and explore with this. So it looks like I'm going to have to, since I already submitted it, I guess I can't show you again. One thing that I wanted you to know is that you can embed videos. So in something that you may have noticed on your, when you're submitting your blogs, you may have noticed that you can submit something like called a mashup. Let me show you how that might look if you were submitting your blog. If I were to create a blog entry, for those of you who've done this, which is everyone, you have like a text, an HTML text editor. Okay. Here you can type in your text. That's no problem. You all have done that. You can modify and edit it using bullets or whatever. Okay, but if you decide that you want to add something called like a mashup, like a YouTube video, or a SlideShare presentation, or a Flickr video, or Blackboard, you can go to mashup for YouTube. You can put in a particular URL if you want that specific URL, so you know that it's http www. Whatever. You can search, put that into that search window and hit go, and we'll find it. Or you can just search for football, and it pulls up a bunch of different videos that have football in the title. And you can preview it, you can select it, and then if you select it, you can place, make some decisions about it. You can add some text below. Now, I don't suggest, or excuse me, you can also then do links, right? You may have done this in different classes, but let's say I want to link to an external site. When I copy that, there are two icons here that come up. There's a insert edit link, or there's a break link. If I click on that chain link, I can type in whatever it was. If I wanted to go to facebook.com, that was the external site that I wanted, and I wanted to open it in a new window, I could insert that, and it will be, should become a hyperlink for somebody to be able to click right on and go to that particular link externally just by hyperlinking instead of having to copy and paste into your URL. So you can submit by typing for your Make It an A+ unit. You can submit by typing into the text box when you're in that assignment. You can also attach different files from your computer if in fact you have those created. Okay? But the point of our assignment is to challenge you to think a little bit outside of the box. What different types of technology tools might you be able to use to enhance a unit that has been strong for you? And it doesn't have to be, the tools don't necessarily have to be anything more complex than you need it to be, just finding ways that it can enhance that unit. So as we wrap up our class, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It is just a little bit before 8:30, so if you do have questions or concerns, please email me those, and I will promptly reply. I apologize for those of you who did email me in the eCampus system. I've just recently gotten back to you because I had a setting set such a way I wasn't getting notifications, but that has been resolved. So thank you very much, and we will see you next Tuesday.